and welcome to Viewpoint. I'm joined today by Adam Sauer, the director of the Poland-Canada Democracy Support Program for Ukraine. Adam, many thanks for joining us.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Adam, we don't have a lot of time. I'll cut straight to the chase. I found that you were quoted by Sputnik, which is a Russian-backed source. They cited you in Deutsche Welle as saying that sanctions that the West had applied on Russia had not been very effective. You felt that Western leaders felt the sanctions had not been. Is that true?
Probably it was misunderstanding of or manipulation of Sputnik, because sanctions are not effective. In fact, that the Crimea is not freed from occupation. We have a little better situation on Donbass, but still the question of Donbass is not solved.
So, I mean, so for example, so just to fill us in with the timeline. So, March 2014, Russia comes in and takes Crimea from Ukraine. The West is a little bit slow to react, but
yes,
they do 2 months.
2 months slower.
And they applied sanctions 2 months after the annexation.
Yeah.
But it didn't stop Russia from coming in to East Ukraine and occupying more
Russia
territory.
already started the aggression towards eastern Ukraine earlier, prior to the introduction of sanctions.
Yes.
The seizure of the governmental building in Luhansk, Donetsk took place in March, April 2014. So
prior to the sanctions.
Prior to the sanctions, and
yes.
the sanctions regarding to Donbass was introduced even later in July, as I remember, 14.
Yes.
And there are 2 types of sanctions: the sanctions related to the Crimea, occupation of Crimea, and the sanctions related to the attack on Donbass.
Right.
And these sanctions related to the attack to Donbass are linked also to the Minsk agreement.
Yes, to the Minsk agreement. So this is the peace deal with Ukraine, Russia.
Yes, you need to know that the sanctions related to Crimea was prolonged till June 2016.
Yes.
And the sanctions regarding to Donbass will be prolonged if the Minsk agreement will be fulfilled.
Not fulfilled.
And it's going that will not be fulfilled soon. At least, for instance, Ukrainian control over the border of Donetsk and Luhansk regions.
Not expected until sometime next year, I believe.
It should be,
perhaps,
according to the Minsk.
According to that.
Only 2 months.
So, I mean, you think so? I mean, so initially, we had these sanctions. They do seem to have had some effect now. I mean, if we look at East Ukraine 18 months later, today, things have quietened down. There's less casualties. People are not really actively fighting there anymore. Can we attribute this to the Western policies, the success of this down to the West?
Definitely the unity of the Western society in the question of occupation of Crimea and attack on Donbass plays the role, stopped the Russian aggression also.
And if we look, I mean, if we think 18 months since everything started in Ukraine, March 2014, we had the annexation of Crimea. Yeah. That's not a bad timescale, actually, is it, for Western policy to have an effect in Russia?
Yes, European Union was never so fast. We did it 2 months later, but came to mutual agreement of all the member states. 2 months is really nothing. I
mean, for having member states to agree on anything.
To agree on anything, yes. The more on the sanctions, also we expected it will affect on the economy of the European Union. It was obvious that Russia will enter the embargo on European Union products. Yes. So we had to measure risks and to take the decision. But of course, there are some priorities more important than the so-called Polish apples.
Polish apples, indeed. And speaking of those Polish apples, we have heard lately from some officials and some sources that they are thinking of lifting sanctions because things have quietened down in the east of the country. That, for Polish farmers, for Polish apples, that could be good news. And I'm sure there are many groups who do want that because of trade. They want to get these economic relations back up and running with Russia.
You know, you have to, and of course, any liberalizations of any relations, any country will help the economy. You can liberalize the economy, even the most oppressive regime, and will have the added value on the economy. But the question is, if it's worth, if you have no reasons. This example of the sanctions, how the sanctions work in the communist Poland. After the martial law introduced by General Jaruzelski.
This is in the 1980s.
1980s. And in 1980s, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher introduced sanctions against the Polish People's Republic. And it took 10 years to have the results, means that the collapse of this Polish communist economy forced the oppressive regime to negotiate with the opposition and smoothly to change the regime to take the democracy.
Yes.
I remember from my childhood, we had the Ronald Reagan and the bad guy in every television program as a person who was guilty of the poverty of the Polish, not the communist regime and their oppressions, just the Ronald Reagan and its sanctions.
Yes, and so now do they say...
And now we have the monument of Ronald Reagan in the center of Warsaw.
Yes.
And the free economy is the fastest growing economy in Europe.
It's absolutely one of the best performing in Eastern Europe.
Yes, and there's also the example that sanctions can work. Well,
yes.
It takes time. But
so
you need to have some results. If you have no results, like in example Crimea, you have to maintain these sanctions.
Yeah.
If there will be some results of the Minsk agreement, okay, it's fine to release the sanctions. But what you need to know also, as for the Polish apples, the share of the Russia in Polish export prior in 2013, means prior the sanctions, prior the war, was 4% only.
Oh, right.
4%.
Okay.
And after the Russian embargo, it fell by half to 2%.
Okay.
So it's completely insignificant.
Yes.
On the other hand, the Polish export growth, the total growth of the Polish export for 2014 was 9%.
Okay.
Just the second after Germany growth.
Yes.
But you can see that the sanctions has very limited or no real
effect. So Poland is you don't need Russia. You don't really need Russia. It's not that crucial to at least to Poland.
I couldn't risk to tell this, but but of course the Russian cannot blackmail us with their embargo.
Yes, but Poland is one thing. Poland is quite a strong economy. It's democratic. You have a solid market system there. Now Ukraine is a different question, because I think Ukraine has also brought in sanctions against Russia, and the trade between the two countries has been cut drastically since the war happened. For example, we've got coming this month a ban on Russian airlines using Ukrainian airspace. What's your opinion about those? For me, it seems like for Ukraine to do that is potentially very dangerous, because Ukraine does rely quite heavily on Russia as a trade partner, and ordinary Ukrainians might be the ones here which suffer.
Yes, always ordinary citizens suffer of sanctions. The same in Russia. I suppose also Russian citizens also suffer of the sanctions of Russia against Ukraine, on the war of Russia. I'm sure that the Russian citizens are suffering of the war of Russia against Ukraine.
Yes,
so,
and yet Putin's support remains
but it is
high.
also the opportunity to diversify the economy, diversify the export, to be more competitive, to invest in development of new technologies, and to be competitive on the European market.
Yes.
Why Poland, whose economy starting point was very similar to Ukraine? We have the similar natural resources, we have also the land. Even Ukraine has better land than Poland. Also the same level of agriculture.
Yes.
Why Ukraine cannot have 70% of its export focused on European Union like Poland has?
So you ultimately see this as a good thing. This is a
this is a good thing.
It's perhaps a necessary thing. It's painful in the short term.
It's
but
painful,
necessary.
but necessary to reorient the directions of the economic development of the export, for instance. The European market is much more difficult than Russian, obviously. It will be very hard to enter the European market.
Because Ukraine's going to need to adapt to European standards.
Of having these stable partners.
Yes, yes.
It's like schizophrenia to have the big, strong economic relations with the country who attacks you.
I know, it is not. Mr. Sauer, we're quite short on time, so if we can just say, let's look forward a little bit. What's your thoughts? Ukraine has made a decisive break with the past now, and it is on a different track towards Europe. Do you agree with that? Are we going to see some progress?
I'm sure. It's if the business will be free to make to work in European Union, and if the conditions to developing business in Ukraine will be better, definitely they will change the direction of. But the war, and the Ukrainian people will benefit of this.
Yes, but the war in Ukraine, it needs to end first. The war in the east. Before anything else can happen. Is that true? I mean, we can't have this frozen conflict going on because no one will invest in this country. Of
course, it will make the investment in this country harder. also no one would invest. We have the frozen conflict in Moldova
Yes.
and in Georgia, and some countries invest. The question is, if the investment is not so high, it's not because of the frozen conflict only.
Okay.
But we hope that at least the frozen conflict in the East will be solved. Also thanks to the worsening of the economic situation in Russia and the sanctions.
Thank you. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Sauer, for a very interesting discussion.
It's nice to discuss with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've been watching Viewpoint. We've been joined by Adam Sauer, the director for the Poland-Canada Democracy Support Program for Ukraine. This is Ukraine Today. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Viewpoint.